On this episode, I interview 3 documentary teams that are on the Oscars shortlist with the films Union, Eno, and Porcelain War. I'm Thom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. This past weekend in New York City, I sat down with several documentary feature directors on the Oscars shortlist. We'll bring you those conversations in this 2-part episode. One factor uniting the 3 films in this episode is that they are all self-distributed. They exemplify a crisis in the current marketplace that tends to work against films that delve too deeply into politics or push creative boundaries. We were speaking on January 5th, just a couple weeks before Donald Trump is set to take office. That political moment loomed in the background as we discussed topics of labor and Russia's war against Ukraine. Our first film is Union, about the grassroots movement to organize workers at an Amazon warehouse on Staten Island. The directors Stephen Maing and Brett Story had their own distinguished careers before teaming up on this project. In setting out to make Union, they knew chances were slim of getting a corporate streamer on board. For the past year, they've been actively involved in screening the film around the country. A key figure in Union is Chris Smalls. He had worked at Amazon for 5 years up until the COVID-19 lockdown in March 2020. That month, he organized a walkout to protest unsafe working conditions. In retaliation, he was fired by Amazon. He turned his energy to unionizing the workplace, and Amazon fought vigorously against him. Here's a clip from Union where Chris Smalls vents frustration from his years inside the warehouse.
I applied to be a manager 50 times. You probably got less than a 2% chance of becoming the manager from becoming the PA. And if you're black, shit, you got 1% chance. When I mean I was training managers, I was literally training them. How the fuck am I gonna be a PA when I know more than you? You gotta come to me for shit. So, who's the real manager? Me.
The directors followed the organizers from early in their process. At first, their aspirations seemed more idealistic than realistic. But over the months of filming, Stephen and Brett captured an historic labor victory. I started by asking Brett to describe what their expectations were going into the project.
We certainly didn't know that they were going to win. We hardly even knew whether or not they would make it to an election. The film started actually before they even decided to form a unionization campaign. Our producers had contacted Chris in the early days, the early months of the pandemic. People might remember this, he was in the news briefly for having led a walkout at this Amazon facility to protest the company's lack of COVID precautions, and then was fired. And there was a leaked memo that said, yeah, let's make this guy the face of the movement because he's not smart or articulate, which, as you can tell already from that clip, really lit a fire under Chris. And so he started doing some organizing and some protests, and our producers made contact with him. And so we were exploring the idea of a film that in some way was about essential workers, in some way about what the modern economy is like at this moment. And Chris and this very small handful of people that worked at the same facility decided to start their own unionization campaign, a totally unlikely campaign because they had no support by any major union. And we saw an opportunity to make a film about, in some ways, just about why anyone would do that, would make that effort. A group of people learning how to become political organizers in real time, a group of people, refusing the received wisdom about what we can and cannot do, who we can and cannot take on, and starting something that was so unlikely they couldn't even find support among other people that want unions in their workplaces. And so we didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew there would be something really interesting and important just about observing a group of people figuring it out and learning how to do this and learning about themselves, as part of this effort.
Did you feel it was most likely that this wasn't going to succeed?
I think there were different feelings on our team. I mean, I personally had some pessimism, and I think that was partly because I've also started, been part of union efforts and drunk some of the negative and pessimistic Kool-Aid of a era that is really kind of, there's lots of reasons to be depressed. And I think there were a lot of journalists and labor leaders we were talking to who were saying, they can't do it, they're not doing it the right way, it's so hard, Amazon is ununionizable. And so I think for the first while, I wasn't sure that they could win, but I certainly thought they were going to, even if they lost, that their effort would inspire others. So that felt really important. I feel like others on our team were more optimistic than I was.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was pretty remarkable, right? Watching them day in and day out set this tent up. There were small, I think, bits of information that you would glean that over the course of like 100 days, 200 days, 300 days of filming with them and watching them wage this campaign, in all weather, day or night, and this feeling that when people just refuse to give up and refuse to not set up the tent and refuse to not, talk to their workers, it really felt like something was going to happen. Like win or lose, it became clear that they were absolutely intent on becoming a catalyst for some kind of change, regardless. And that in many ways they started talking about themselves as a union already, whether or not they were certified for an election, whether or not they won the election, whether or not now Amazon shows up 2.5 years after they have been defeated to bargain a contract, that they are absolutely union, they can make meaningful gains for workers. So I think we felt that in and out throughout the campaign.
Now, one of the things that we see in this clip is the kind of messiness of organizing. I mean, you see people who with different strategies, and it comes up in other times in the film, and you follow Chris Smalls pretty closely, but you also follow people who are critics of his approach. And I wonder if you can talk about the way you were approaching the messiness of the process.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start off. There's a lot to be said about that, right? I think we have seen too many documentaries that attempt to kind of like either create the Wikipedia entry of the story or create kind of tidy, clean narratives. And if anything, the labor movement has been rife with struggle, especially now in a moment of like the highest decline in union density. And so it was important to show that the unionization movement, the grassroots movements that are driving it now, are up against incredible challenges, right? It was a $14 million campaign that set to disorganize all of the work they were doing. And here were workers working in the most insidious and harshest working environments, right? So it was, it's 3 to 12 times more dangerous than any industry. Amazon is considered more dangerous than logging and law enforcement. And so to think that...
Plus they need logging to make those boxes. So.
That's right, yeah. And so to think that a campaign would be clean and not messy, I mean, is kind of ludicrous. And to think that to gather all this disparate kinds of people, right, who are attempting to break through this isolation that, I mean, frankly, like capitalism seeks to define and separate us, right? To make us together in this room, but feel alone. And so I think for them to seek out community and understand, oh wow, we have a shared experience, even if it's not the exact same lived experience, is this catalyst to actually act on behalf of the collective and to try and be optimistic, right, in a way, when there was no hope. And so I think that leads to a lot of, hard conversations. And for us as filmmakers, I think we really cared about making sure that people can be charismatic and flawed, people can be selfless and selfish, and that those vulnerabilities are the discomfort all of these organizers were leaning into in order to succeed and actually be bound together.
Yeah, and I'll just add, Steve and I are filmmakers. As all filmmakers do, we're always asking ourselves, why does this need to be a film? What does a film have to offer that the newspaper article version doesn't, that the book, that the report doesn't offer? What can we bring to audiences? And I think, we're interested in films that that have a life outside of their tight 90 minutes, that burrow their way into your brain and challenge us and ask hard questions and provoke a lot of necessary feeling. And so we always knew that we were interested in the sort of group dynamic and the way in which, complicated people can pull off tremendous things, not despite their complications, but in some places and times because of their complications. And that was going to be part of the film.
Well, one of the ways in which this film makes a unique contribution is in its image making, and you feel that from, like, there's an early image in the film of a tanker crossing the screen down the water, and I can't think of how many times I've seen a tanker on the rivers around New York, but somehow that image made me see it in a new way, and I think that happens a lot of times in this film. Can you talk about the image making in the film, the deliberateness behind it?
Sure. I think like the observational mode is, a really exciting like avenue of inquiry. I mean, I love all of the forms, but the observational one I think gives you space to try and, a space and time actually to kind of like understand what is like the visual landscape, right, that people exist in, and actually ask these questions without realizing that with more time spent, you're starting to question like how people are all placed as actors within a larger economic or political structure. And so it was only sort of like, I think out of a great intuition, right, as we're going through this process, we had this incredible cinematographer, Martin DeCicco, who shot those tanker shots. And so I think like out of this sense of like traveling over the Verrazano Bridge every day to film in Staten Island, you can't not start to think about the workers and their connection to the transportation of globalized goods. And so that's just one of many ways I think that having time and space to really imagine where the people, your participants in your film, exist and what they look at and exist within is one of the things that happened.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about a lot during production and in the edit was just this question of scale. We knew most of the film was going to take place at this really intimate scale, needed to. We were going to be at the bus stop, at this tent, with this small group of people over a very long time, and that was necessary to communicate the fatigue, the endurance, the hope, the desire. All of that needed to be built into the kind of intimate fabric of the film, but we didn't want to lose sight of the nature of what they're up against, which is planetary. And so those cargo ships become a kind of visual shorthand, a visual way to communicate that their struggle is not just local, it's international, it's global, that these massive ships are carrying goods from halfway around the world, and that this is one small speck in the sand in relation to a company whose operation is completely global. So it becomes a kind of visual way to communicate that without anyone ever having to say it.
And how did you get shots inside the Amazon facility?
So we made a decision actually early on that we weren't going to try and get ourselves into the building. We understood, we made enough.
I want to get the job.
Well, we just debated that, but we knew that just going and asking permission to shoot inside would necessarily be a kind of compromise our footage, or that's at least what we felt. And so we were really lucky in that because of it's part of their struggle, workers themselves were starting to document. They were making videos, posting them on social media. This is something also new that they were doing, because up until the pandemic, workers were not allowed to bring their phones inside. They had to put them in the locker. So it was a concession during the pandemic that workers would even have phones. And then our worker organizers started to do all this documentation. And so we treated them as collaborators, and we licensed footage from workers who were taking their own footage.
So this movement continues. Even just recently, there was an Amazon strike. What's your perspective on where this movement is going, and how has the film kind of been part of that for people as an educational tool or a motivational tool? Or?
It's no accident, I think, that for a story about workers who have existed for decades as part of the invisible working class would be in a film that has been rendered commercially invisible, mostly. And so I think that, like it's our work to bring the film to the workers that, and the organizers, writ large, that care about this issue, this idea that, energetically, when you find and connect with your community and find common cause, anything is possible, not to be corny, but I think they proved it, right? With a $120,000 crowdfund, they beat a $14 million campaign. And so I think that speaks, dramatically to this idea that, just a couple of weeks ago during peak season, leading up to Christmas, it was announced that when Amazon refused yet again to show up at the bargaining table, they were going to strike. And so workers in not just New York, 2 buildings here in New York that we filmed with, but in Georgia and Chicago and Illinois and California, thousands of workers showed up to strike. And so they saw this not as like the first in a terminal series of moments to force the negotiation, but like as a recruitment moment to demonstrate to Amazon, look, when we just decided to strike for 5 days, look how many people show up and stand by for more.
Yeah, and I think it's clear from the film that Steve and I came to this film out of a sense of solidarity with this struggle, not just because we believe, in the inherent value of workers' rights and dignity, but also because we think that worker rights are necessary to a functioning democracy. And I think that we continue to feel like that. And I think, there's a lot of trepidation about what's going to happen in just a couple days. And a lot is going to change around labor law and the NLRB. But in some ways, the genie's out of the bottle. I mean, this is why Chris was being talked about by the company brass in this meeting. There's an understanding that worker struggle is contagious, that seeing one group of people win this victory when they weren't supposed to was inspiring, continues to be inspiring, and I don't see any kind of diminishment to worker struggle in the coming months or years, hopefully.
That was Brett Story and Stephen Maing talking about their film, Union. The next film is Eno. You may remember last month on episode 210, I spoke with Brian Eno about this innovative portrait of his career. Eno said he resisted the idea of a film biography that would tell just one version of his life. So the director Gary Hustwit found a unique approach. He started with hundreds of hours of footage from Eno's life and worked with a collaborator on a computer program that reshuffles the scenes in the film for each screening. One recurring motif is a deck of cards that Eno helped create called Oblique Strategies. The cards were designed when Eno was working as a record producer. He wrote down a series of cryptic prompts that were designed to shake up the creative process. Here's a clip from the film where Eno describes how the cards got used.
One of the games that David Bowie and I used to do was we would each pull a card and keep it secret, not tell each other what we'd got. And so we'd both be proceeding under some kind of order. And then at the end, we'd find out what it was. I remember one day when we were working in Berlin on those sessions, I guess for Heroes, we were working on something together and the piece was going through sort of quite radical transformations as it went back and forth between us. And so we'd each pulled a card, and my card was change nothing and continue with immaculate consistency. And his card was destroy the most important thing. So out of that came, I think it was the piece called Moss Garden, I think came out of that. You'd never know from those two instructions.
In the film, we see the artist Laurie Anderson read some of the cards from Oblique Strategies. She's a longtime friend of Eno and joined Gary for this conversation. Gary has a history of exploring the creative process in films such as Helvetica, about graphic designers, and Urbanized, about urban thinkers. I asked him to explain his interest in the creative process and how it applies to this film.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've always been just sort of obsessed with or curious about, creative processes of designers or architects or artists or musicians. And I think it's valuable to talk about creativity and to like try to decode some of these ideas and I get to show them to people in the form of the films. It's really kind of personal. Like, I think for me, it's about the exploration of these ideas, and I get to meet and talk with amazing creative artists. And the films are almost like the byproduct of that exploration, but it's stuff that I'm obsessed with and that I want to know more about. And it's kind of expressed itself in the documentaries that I've made so far. And this one for sure was I just wanted the film to be about creativity. I love Brian's work, and it's been super influential to me. But I didn't want it to be a hagiography. I wanted to really focus on his creative process. So pretty much, no matter what version of the film you see, almost anything that you're going to see, there is some sort of creative takeaway from it.
Laurie, what made you say yes to Gary, and what does the work of Brian Eno mean to you?
Well, I'm always a little bit suspicious of things about creativity. It's like, it's so hard to define that. So, but Brian is one of my best friends, and I've known him for many decades. And so I really was curious about how he would like to express what he was doing. And because he does turn things inside out. And I'm glad it was very specific. I mean, the way that you really showed how he's working is, to me, much more valuable than talking about it. So.
Sure. Yeah. I think it was funny because when I showed up to do the filming for the cards, I think you maybe thought we were just going to talk about Brian, and I was like, nope, just here's the cards. Just like pick the cards, read the cards, because there are no contemporary interviews. That was something that Brian and I talked about early on. It wasn't about going and talking to a lot of other artists and like, why is he so important or anything like that. It's really his creative ideas and then this vast archive. I mean, 50 plus years of over 500 hours of footage that we went through. So, but I like the idea of using the cards as some sort of like Deus Ex Machina, like when Laurie or then David Byrne also reads a bunch of cards. And depending on which card comes up, that will divert the film or unlock scenes that you.
That's part of the computer program. The computer knows to like listen to that command and go somewhere else. There's
like a dozen different cards that could come up in the film, and when they do, that will kind of divert things. It's just one more way to sort of bring variety into each iteration of the film.
Well, I mean, Laurie, since have known Brian for so many decades, when you watch the film, but besides getting to see him at work, what else did you take away from it?
Well, I think the practicality of the things he was doing, how he would solve a problem, particularly in the studio, and it just reminded me of a lot of things that happened when we were working. For example, there was one time when I was working on a song that was pretty terrible, and he said, "Just let me." Let me mix this. Just give me a couple hours. I was like, okay, well, I'll sit back here. And he said, no, I think you should just go. And I was like, go? You mean? And what happened was I had a little tiny part in the song, which is a little shaker, just a very little salt shaking kind of rhythm thing. And when I came back, and a lot of other instruments. When I came back, the salt shaker was this big. It was and the other things were like prancing around it. I was like, this is so bizarre and wonderful. And it did remind me of how to take a really tiny element and just switch the focus. And he was constantly teaching me how to be much more, much looser with my ideas of how things should be. And just to really listen more carefully to what was going on instead of just try to. I mean, feel like I've tried to learn that so many times. You get an idea and you want to put it into a work of art, and you just try to force it, and it's like so many times. Just with sculpture, for example, your materials are in pieces on the floor, because they resist your ideas. Mm-hmm. And so the way that he used his ideas in a very material way was what I think you really showed in the film so beautifully. It's not just talking about how to be creative. No, it's like going, and the strategies of how to get yourself to kind of be more flexible, really.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think, in a way, filmmaking, there's parallels to everything you just said about trying to force the material, or, I think as a filmmaker, and probably most of the people in this room, you get into kind of habits. You get into sort of like the same approach. Maybe the subjects change, but the way a shot looks or the way you use music, you kind of get into these, not a rut, but I found myself kind of repeating myself in the approach. So this film completely, it was about disrupting that my process too, because I can't help but just be disrupted, because we've created this system in which the film can make itself, but I have to kind of surrender a little bit of the each iteration. I'm not meticulously crafting. I'm just letting the system make the thing. But we spent thousands of hours and years, both with our editors and with Brendan, the programmer, to make this thing that it works every time, to the point where I'm okay with whatever it does, because I might have the ideal version of this film in my head, but that would be different from your ideal version, and everybody in the room would have their own perfect version of this film or any film. So in some ways, this kind of takes away the subjectivity of it, and it can work differently each time you see it. You see it, it's all about Brian, but you're getting to you're discovering other things about him each time, and you're connecting the dots in a different way. And I think it sort of engages that part of our brain that wants to make connections and find patterns and solve puzzles. So it's a different kind of watching experience, I think, if you've seen multiple versions, but it's definitely a different kind of filmmaking experience. It's been pretty wild making 500 versions of the film. It would have been so much easier if it was at Sundance, we locked the DCP and all right, we're done, and just talk. But I just added something to the program last week. You can continue to add, since Sundance, we've added hours and hours of additional footage and scenes and music, and it's you can continue to evolve it. And I think it's an interesting idea that has bigger implications than just this film and this year.
How far this is going to go? Because if you allowed AI to use oblique strategies and make your film, that's a film I'd also like to see.
Yeah.
Well, how far do you let technology structure your work? Yeah. And all of you who are using it, that's really a big issue now, more and more every day.
Actually, you just stumbled upon something that I wanted to ask you more about. You've been an early adopter of all kinds of technology in your work, Laurie. Now technology, it feels like at this kind of pivot point with AI where we could be crossing into something very unknown, very scary. And I wonder, as someone who's, to my eyes, been an embracer of technology, what you're feeling about this moment.
I'm really optimistic. I love working with AI. It's like having a giant notebook, but it depends on, of course, what it's trained on. So I was working with a big supercomputer in Australia at the Machine Learning Institute that put everything that I've ever said or written or mumbled or whatever into this language supercomputer. So it's a collaborator. And I think that is going to be a future for everybody, is that you'll be able to collaborate with your own notebooks, let's say. But if everything that you ever scribbled, every thought you ever had was available to you, and it would remind you of how you could work. So it's got some terrifying side effects.
Thank you for acknowledging.
But it's like,
But on balance, I mean, it's so powerful. And I think people who are, I have a friend who's a teacher who, she's, all of her students use ChatGPT to write their papers, and she uses ChatGPT to grade them. So, it's like, how will we use this really in an intelligent way? Have to see where it goes.
yeah, I think that's a great example, though, of using it with your own material, or using a system that you're building around your own material. That no one else's stuff is in that mix. You're using the technology as this tool to kind of, again, work with your past work. Like in this situation with the Eno platform, it's a generative video platform, but it's human coded. We didn't train it on other people's documentaries and have it watch 1,000 docs and then just like, copy what that does. We put our own intelligence as filmmakers and storytellers into the programming. So it's and the data set is all our material. So there are ways to use this technology that you can build your own models, you can build your own algorithms, and that opens up a ton of possibilities that aren't that don't have the ethical questions around it. It's a tool. Like, I think of it as not as like a footage generating tool. I think of it as a story structure organizational tool, and just thinking about what are all the different cinematic stories we can tell if we do allow the film to have that agency and be able to change, be able to evolve. Like, we haven't even had a reason to think about those stories, or because we didn't have the capability. And now that we have the capability to do that, how could you, write a fiction film or make a documentary that maybe has a lot of different, conflicting views in it. Maybe you could, restructure in different ways that engage the audience more, or bring up other ideas. So I'm just interested in pushing the nonfiction form forward using technology that we as filmmakers develop and not just get handed from Silicon Valley.
That was Gary Hustwit and Laurie Anderson talking about the documentary Eno. Our final conversation on this episode deals with the film Porcelain War, about artists in Ukraine trying to uphold their creativity against the backdrop of war. At the center of the film is the married couple, Slava Leontyev and Anya Stasenko, who create porcelain figurines together. When Russia invaded their country in 2022, Slava was in communication with the filmmaker Brendan Belomo in the United States. They embarked on a long-distance collaboration. Brendan sent Slava camera equipment and gave instructions by Zoom. The film gained a key collaborator in writer-producer Paula Dupre Pesman, whose prior producing credits include Quincy and The Cove. Last year, Porcelain War won the Sundance Grand Jury Prize. For our conversation, Slava and Paula were joined by Oscar-nominated filmmaker Joe Berlinger, known for films such as Brothers Keeper and Paradise Lost. As you'll hear, Joe has a great love for the observational approach known as cinema verite. As the three of them took the stage, Slava had a small dog named Frodo on his lap. In the film, we see Slava living two roles, one as an artist, the other in the military, where he trains civilians now becoming soldiers on how to use weapons. I asked him how he found the balance between being an artist and a soldier.
When I filmed, I never tried to find balance. I was completely in moment, because in the time of war can take away all your strength, and everyone who is able to do something during the war slice his attention in very thin slice. And now I have something I have 2 hours to teach civilians how to shoot. I cannot pay attention for something else. I feel in life of these people in my hands. I not remember about camera. I'm so happy. Our cinematographer Andrei Stefanov, he's amazing artist and he's perfectionist. And I never thought what he doing. I only knew extra person on shooting range, and I cannot turn barrel of my rifle in that direction. I not thought about movie that moment. When I have few hours for Porcelain, I was completely concentrated on Porcelain, and I never thought about camera look on me, because okay, right now maybe next missile attack and blackout, and I will have not time to finish my work as artist. And when I filmed, I also never thought about something except what I have, what I find in this really weird and surrealistic world of war. Because it's really surrealistic experience to have the war right outside your door. But anyway, we all my friends, these civilian soldiers, and me, and Anya, and Andrei, our cinematographer, we are the same civilian people, same peaceful people, and we're trying to save state of mind what we had before the war. It was really natural for us as artists look around and try to find something beautiful and really important, because war is completely disgusting, completely, and nobody needs this experience. We have not to bring this experience to audience. We are interested in people who can preserve humanity in the face of this horrible danger in this really dark time.
Mm. Paula, how did you get involved in the project, and what spoke to you about this?
I was asked by a friend if I would meet these people, because he said none of them had ever made a documentary film before, and they had collaborated on art before, and had one camera that they had sent over and started to get some images and weren't sure what to do. And so I said, yeah, it's one of those things when you're a producer, you get those calls, and got on a Zoom and met them and saw some of the imagery and what they were doing, and was all in. The idea of being able to support people to tell their story was really moving to me, but when I started seeing, and the more I got to know them, and we sent more cameras and continued the journey, I hadn't experienced anything so personal and intimate, and I was really moved by that humanity that I hadn't seen in war before and I wasn't aware of. I was thinking in my mind, I guess I had this preconceived notion that people retreat and cower, and they weren't doing that. And it was so eye-opening that, they say live every day like it's your last, right? There's all these sayings around things like that, but they actually do that. And it was really inspiring and something that will be with me forever, about really cherishing people, nature, things in your life that you care about, freedom, and right now with who knows what's going to be happening with the new administration, there's a lot of concern around that and the fragility of freedom, and these people are brave and inspiring, so being able to support them was really an honor.
Joe, when you watch this film, what speaks to you about it, either in the filmmaking or the story?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I have nothing to do with this film. I was absolutely gobsmacked when I saw it. It just spoke to me so deeply on so many levels, and I reached out to Paula, who I don't know very well. We met a couple of times over the years, and just offered my assistance, which I don't usually do because I'm just busy, but I just felt this film was so important that I wanted to offer my help. And it's important on so many levels. I mean, we've seen many conflict films, where you're enraged, because of the conflict, but somehow it's distancing. And this was a strangely uplifting and inspiring film about the power of love, the power of redemption, resistance to the crushing of culture, which is what the Russian effort is, what all genocide is. I just felt it was such an important point at the film, and it also, not to give a lecture here, but it also intersected with my growing deep distress over the state of cinema verite in our business. I've been lucky enough to make a few verite films over the years that have changed the outcome of things. I will get myself in trouble, perhaps, by saying this. I have an overall deal at Netflix, and I'm kept very busy, but I've, for several years, have been unable to get a verite film off the ground at Netflix with a 30-year track record. And it's just not a great time for verite. So I really wanted to promote a film that is so important in this era, but it's also, it's very fucked up. 3 or 4 years ago, winning Sundance, this film would have a bidding war, and it just deeply distresses me where we're at in terms of getting verite films. There are so many great verite films that are just struggling, and nobody wants to do verite anymore because it's a 12-week window, and this is the budget, and you got to deliver it by then. And Bruce Sinofsky and I knew nothing about, well, that's not true. He was an editor. I knew nothing about filmmaking at the start of Brothers Keeper, and we just kind of magically had this incredible experience, and I just felt a real kinship to this film. And it's also, now is the time to get the word out, because, God knows what's going to happen once this new administration takes over. But there's just so many things about this film that are so uplifting, and we as a community really have to take a stance and figure out how to get verite films greenlit and sold, because it's strange what has happened. It really is.
Slava, now that the film has been out in the world for a year, I wonder if it's changed for you. Like, is it different for you to watch it today, or to see audiences watch it today than it was a year ago?
I'm not sure. I was, when we filmed, I was really afraid this opportunity to film something like news footage. Because I felt, okay, film will be finished in a year or two, and nobody knows who will survive so far, and we will have old news. But anyway, we never make something artificial. We filmed what we felt and what we saw. We, as visual artists, we tried to find something not so actual, but important forever. It's not so easy in wartime, because war is not visual. War is more about horrible sound and disgusting smell, and how I am tired, how sad I am because my close friend was killed yesterday. But nobody need this kind of experience. We have other tools. We have other brush for paint, and we just try to find something most important. And now I'm completely happy, because nothing in our movie was changed for me. I have the same eyes for this after the year, and I felt this movie like in first day when I filmed some episodes, some parts or when I first time in Sundance, it was first time for me, I saw it on big screen. Nothing changed, and I'm really happy because it's my responsibility. I'm here instead of all these amazing people who helped me do this. In Ukraine, my friends from my unit who fought instead of me when I filmed, and all Ukrainian soldiers and civilians who gave me this opportunity, because bravery of Ukrainian soldiers and patience of Ukrainian civilians is behind me, and I'm really happy now.
That was Slava Leontyev, the co-director of Porcelain War, joined by his producer, Paula Dupre Pesman, and one of the film's many admirers, Joe Berlinger. On our next episode, we'll hear from 4 other filmmaking teams on the Oscars shortlist for documentary feature. Thanks to the team at The Ankler who co-presented this event with Pure Nonfiction, especially London Sanders and Hannah Hensler. January will be a busy month for us, including extensive coverage of the Sundance Film Festival in our newsletter written by Bella Racklin. You'll find the newsletter Doc Voices on Substack. If you want to advertise to our 40,000 readers, send an email to listen@purenonfiction.net. Thanks to our team, series producer Hannah Nordenswan and web designer Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Raphael Nehausen. I'm Thom Powers. Follow us on Instagram and visit our website at purenonfiction.net.